Stephen's private life.
Too much.
Can we turn the air conditioning on again?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Our one's on. Nice and cool that.
Bloody leaders.
We're continuing on the theme of Orania. And I'm sure if Stephen's got longer than I think we originally planned, don't you?
Actually, you know what? I shortened
So you
this
can
one a
bring
bit,
the other
so we
guys
can-
in as well. Yaku and Ru.
Yeah, so the first bit is all structured and fixed. But once we get through the first 38 slides, then we can do the fix.
Well, I'll leave it up to you. It's your hour.
Steve, you want to take that microphone?
Yeah, I'll do
If
that.
you want to do the others.
Okay, maybe just Francis quickly say that if there's anyone who wants to go on a tour of the town, Sebastian will take you at 5 o'clock. There's only 13 places on the bus. If it's full, we can arrange another one over the weekend. But he can, with the other tour guide, but he can take you at 5. See the whole town. The bus will be just outside. Just outside the building, yes. And there will still be enough time. There will still be enough time for you to prepare for the dinner at 7.
What time are you expecting us to do dinner?
7. Yes, we start probably at 7. Maybe if you can be there at 6:45, that will be good.
Otherwise you'll miss the...
Right, so after a very long day, we're going to do some maths.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's not serious stuff. I'm sort of trying to link into this morning's chat, but this morning I specifically wanted to create the impression of a little bit of confusion and fuzziness. So what I'd like to do in my first 18 slides is just to bring it back to something a bit more concrete, show you some mathematics behind some economic theory, and then I'll explain to you how that impacts on Orania as one example of a whole bunch of examples, and where economic rules and laws of nature actually take us eventually if we just let it be. Okay, so let's start off with, I titled this The Benefits of Free Trade, not 100% accurate, but anyway, I'd like to start off with explaining the difference between absolute advantage and comparative advantage. There's a bunch of economic principles that push people, or that are incentives for people to be cooperative and nice to each other and more prosperous and all of these things. I just took this one and I'm going to explain it in detail because it's one of the more difficult ones that people have trouble understanding. And if you're not interested, that's fine, have a good nap quickly. But this is one that a lot of people find useful once they understand it. It's a bit hard to understand, but I'll explain it very slowly and clearly. So, first of all, absolute advantage. This is Omar, and she can bake 120 rusks per hour or 60 pancakes per hour. Okay, so that's our starting point. Now, there's a bit of a ratio between that, which I'll get to. But basically, sorry?
What's the question?
A rusk. Oh, it's like, oh, that's a good question. What's a rusk? It's a dried out bread. Yeah, it's like jerky but made from pastry.
Okay, so you divide between the South African and non-South African, rusks and that.
Yes, right.
Coming back to culture.
And I specifically used Omar for cultural purposes. Okay, so Omar can bake 120 rusks or 60 pancakes, depending on what she wants to spend her hour on. Okay, and then I've got Koos over here. It looks like the old movie star, but this is really Koos. He can bake 30 rusks per hour or 40 pancakes. So he can spend his hour baking rusks. He'll get 30 out of that hour or 40 pancakes. So the question now is, since Omar has a clear advantage over Koos both in rusks and in pancakes, she can bake a lot more rusks in 1 hour and she can bake a lot more pancakes in 1 hour. Since she has an absolute advantage over Koos, are these two people ever going to be able to trade? Will they be able to have any kind of relationship as two different human beings? So this starts to speak about our cultural differences and disparities and stuff. Okay, so, or is it better for them, or both of them, to be self-sufficient and just stay apart from each other? This is the big question. So of course, with this absolute advantage that Omar has, I think this is horrible inequality. It's unfair. Omar Inc. is going to take over the world. We should tax Omar's white privileged poor persons a glass ceiling. We have to level the playing field, empower the poor, give back the money. Okay. That's not how it works though in economics, because in economics you have comparative advantage. And this comes from a guy called David Ricardo. Now David Ricardo is famous for the Ricardian vice. It's a problem in economics where people extrapolate so extravagantly that they get it completely wrong. In this particular case, however, in 1817, Ricardo got it spot on. And this is one of the very few things that economists fully agree on, is the benefits that people get from comparative advantage. So I'm going to explain this to you slowly. There's a whole bunch of arrows, but we'll take it step by step. So I've got a column of pancakes over here, and then I've got two columns with rust. So you'll see Omar can bake in an hour 0 pancakes and 120 rust. Or she can bake 10 pancakes and 100 rusks, or she can do 20 pancakes. So as she increases her time spent baking pancakes, the amount of rusks that she can bake in that hour decreases because she has to balance her time, right? The same with Koos. If he doesn't bake any pancakes, he can get 30 rusks out of that hour. Up to the point where once he bakes 40 pancakes an hour, now he doesn't have any time left to bake rusks. Okay. So these two people are now going to bake and try and get the most out of their hour. So if you look at it just from Koos's perspective, he's going to say, if I spend half of my time baking rusks, I'll get 15, and if I spend the other half hour of that hour, I'll get 20 pancakes. So that's sort of a balance for Koos. So if he's trying to be self-sufficient, he'll try and use half of his time on the one, half of his time on the other, and he'll get 15 rusks and 20 pancakes. Omar, of course, she has an advantage because she can spend half an hour with 60 rusks and 30 pancakes. So that's 90 products for her. Good. So far, Omar's still the big leader. But if you add this up, you'll see that under self-sufficiency, the two together will have 50 pancakes. So Omar will have baked 30, and Chris will have baked 20. So that's 50 pancakes. And the rusks are 60 plus 15. So if you add all those products up, and the self-sufficiency is 125 products. If they specialize, and Chris says, I'm doing nothing but rusks, he'll only bake 30. If Omar does nothing but pancakes, she'll get 120. Okay, so
60.
sorry, no,
Pancake, 60.
60, yes, sorry. So if Omar does only pancakes, he'll get 60. If Chris does only rusks, he'll get 30. And the other way around as well. If Omar does only rusks, she'll get 120. If Chris does only pancakes, he'll get 40. Remember, his maximum baking capacity is over there. So in the self-sufficiency, the two of them together can only produce 125 products. But if they specialize, and the one only does what they do best, and the other one does what they do best, they actually end up with 160 products between the two of them. Now, how does this benefit them? Well, if we plot it on a graph, so these arrows come down from those figures up top, I'll show you just now. So this line here is Omar. She can make 120 rusks in an hour, and then 0 pancakes. Or she can make 60 pancakes and 0 rusks, or anything in between. And it doesn't really matter where on this line she bakes, and where on that line first bakes. They will be better off if they focus on the top point there and the bottom point there. So Koos does what he does best, and Omar does what she does best. That combination there and there is going to give you the biggest total number. Okay, and that gives us a benefit when you start trading between people. So obviously Omar doesn't want just rusks. She wants to bake rusks and then trade them so that she can have more products. So if you have a bigger economy and you trade, hopefully you end up with more products. So we see that both Koos and Omar can benefit, but we're not 100% sure yet if this is going to pan out, because this is now economic theory. And it's nice to have it in theory, but how does that work for the individual people? Because we haven't seen the trade portion yet. So let's just have a look at how that actually happens on an interaction kind of basis. So remember now, Omar could make 120 rusks in an hour, 60 pancakes in an hour. That gives her a 2-to-1 ratio between rusks and pancakes. So from Omar's perspective, 1 pancake is worth 2 rusks. Okay, so 120 rusks versus 60 pancakes gives her 2 rusks for every pancake. So that's what a rusk is worth to her. It's basically half a pancake. Okay. Koos sees it differently because he has a lot of time making rusks. It means that the ratio between his 30 rusks and his 40 pancakes is 3 to 4, which means he values the products differently. His value on the pancakes is actually higher than rusks. Okay, and because that relative value is different, what's going to happen is this. Omar can't believe her luck. Here's a person who will trade her 4 pancakes for every 3 rusks. So that's 4 pancakes for 3 rusks. Okay? He's willing to trade 4 pancakes for every 3 rusks she bakes, even though, from her perspective, the rusks are only worth half a pancake. So she thinks this is a bargain. This is genius for Omar. Omar will bake rusks like mad, since she can get 2.5 pancakes per rusk from Koos, based on what she thinks they're worth. So she wins. What about poor Koos? He can't believe his luck. Here's an old lady who can trade him 2 rusks for every pancake he bakes. Because remember, he values pancakes differently than Omar does. Okay? So he's going to bake pancakes like crazy because, you can't really see it down here. Oops, I should zoom that out a bit. But he actually values them at 3 to 4. So it's 3/4 of a rusk for every pancake. So he's getting a big bargain out of the deal. So the conclusion from this is they specialize according to their ability, trade according to their need, without any perfect market information, as if they're guided by an invisible hand, and to the unintended benefit of both. Okay, so far then, the economics lesson for today. Okay, so you guys understand the difference between absolute and comparative advantage. Any questions up to that point?
Oh, yes.
How do you know they're going to find those ratios and understand them?
They
What
don't
guarantee
need
is
to
it?
know, because when Omar trades, she finds this guy. She might not find him, fair, but when she finds this guy, he's looking at her products and he's going, "That's bloody cheap, give me some." And over time, if she realizes, I can make 3 less pancakes and just pass rusks onto this guy, and he'll give me more pancakes than I could ever bake in exchange for that. Over time, they'll sort of start more and more specialization. And they'll realize over time that that's the point where they'll need to reach their maximum capacity.
I'm afraid you miss a great point there, because it's all based on figures. I personally would love Omar's rusks. I wouldn't touch with a barge pole anything that comes from that jumped up Hollywood idol flicking ash into his things. It's a whole quality issue, which isn't taken account of there.
Ceteris paribus, all things being equal, so there's no quality difference in terms of this model. There's actually a brilliant video on this from the Khan Academy. So if anybody wants clear clarification of this, just type in comparative advantage on YouTube.
Khan Academy.
And the Khan Academy video is brilliant on this concept.
Okay, so let's move on from the economics then. There are some criticisms and risks. I just listed a very few of them. Of course, the risks are that skills of the specialist are at risk of becoming redundant. So I put a telegraph operator down there and a horseshoe repairman down here. If you specialize, you're at risk that your whole industry becomes redundant and you can't compete anymore. So that's one risk. The other risk is that the resources you use, like in this case whale oil, becomes unavailable, the things die out, they disappear, the resources run out, and then your whole trade is gone. So basically the lesson from that is don't put all your pecan nuts in one truck. But that's the same with any other risk. Then from a theoretical point of view, people don't split their resources equally, and there's not just 2 products. An economy is a lot more complex. This is not a very clear picture, but it's supposed to be like a whole bunch of nodes branching out. The real economy is quite often more complex than models. In this particular case though, economists all agree, or most agree, and this is the most agreement you will get from economists. There was a joke a few years ago where some president said, please give me an economist with 3 arms, because they always say on the left hand, on the right hand, and on the other hand. But this one, the economists agree on. In practice also, the market does supply signals through the pricing mechanism. It provides us with insurance. So in terms of the risks, you can mitigate that through a normal market system. You don't need government intervention to give you a safety net. And there's the example that people always use around the Irish potato famine, where they say a small bit of climate change can screw up your whole economy, because they were so specialized in potatoes that a small change buggered up the whole economy there. However, that's not true, because if you go and look at the real history, what really happened in Ireland was that they outlawed almost all other products and then put in regulations so they couldn't do anything about the drought. So it was the regulation that killed people. Similarly with Ethiopia in the 1980s, people my age and a little bit older will remember all those hungry kids. A big part of that problem came from regulations where the Ethiopian government prohibited people from trading with other countries. They wanted to be autonomous, lock their borders down, and as a result, a lot of people died of hunger. Right, and I think Sweden is the contra example. The Scandinavian countries often get called socialist, and they were to some extent socialist in the 70s and into the 80s. But in the last 20 years, all the Scandinavian countries have consistently been in the top 20 most capitalist countries in the world. So when people talk about Sweden, they are referring to a capitalist country by all measures. Okay? When Sweden does well, keep in mind that it's a free market country. It's in the top 20 for the last 20 years. They didn't do as well before when they were really socialist. They're long not anymore. In this particular example, I wanted to use Sweden because Sweden gets almost 70% of their GDP from international trade. And I was very interested to see that Orania also gets almost about 70% of its turnover from trade outside of Orania. Right? So it's very interesting how big a contribution international trade can make to your economy if you really try. So this is not just theory, it really does work in practice as well. And some other examples are Hong Kong, Las Vegas, Monaco. In most of these cases, the people around it regulated very heavily, and that concentrated a lot of the economic activity within the free areas. So maybe it helps to have a pedantic, overprotective ANC around and have some freedom inside and a lot of international trade. That might help. Okay, I think I can actually stop there. I had some more slides and details, but I think maybe we should turn it into a bit more of a discussion. You guys look a bit tired. I didn't start with some maths and tables. So
are you therefore linking this with comparative advantage that international trade is fulfillment of?
You can again see this at several different layers. So people interact with each other because of comparative advantage. Communities interact with each other because of comparative advantage. That is the reason why people become pilots and accountants and bikers, like I said this morning. That's why they concentrate into cultures, and that's why the cultures overlap, because people feel around in the dark. There's no formula that you can go and work out or statistics that you can collect. People group themselves into these cultural groupings, which is a form of specialization. So you can call it a culture or a career or whatever, and those things allow you to obtain a benefit. You produce a surplus through that specialization, and you trade with others, and because of that, everybody's better off. The one thing that I didn't show you is the implications of some of this. If you have a shop, you're going to be nicer to people, because if you walk into a State Department, they have absolutely no incentive to help you, whereas at a shop, if you're just slightly upset, you walk out, that's a reduction in turnover. There's big economic incentives to be nice to people. So when you trade with other communities, over time there's a built-in evolutionary process that modifies your culture and your focus and your specialization to a way where it benefits other communities, and where that interactions become peaceful, prosperous, more effective, more efficient, and on the whole, more integrated. advantage is one mechanism through which that happens. So I wanted to explain to you in detail one mechanism. So when we talk about supply and demand, that's another example. When we talk about other economic concepts, you can see how those things make people trade, which is social interaction, and which is good for us. This is one example on the nuts and bolts level of how that actually works.
Just on an individual level, when last did you plant your own potato? When last did you
Knit my own jersey.
your own jersey? When last did you make your own shoes? We live our lives on the fact of opportunity cost. You concentrate on what you do well, you take the money and you buy all the other stuff that you want. We are living examples of that principle.
It's very easy when it's an example like a cell phone. I can't imagine making my own cell phone. And yet, you can extrapolate that
But
same
even things
principle
that you
to
can
anything
make,
else.
that's the point.
Yes.
I'm the best filing clerk that you can get. But I employ a lady that messes up the filing system, and I earn 1,000 Rand an hour doing what I do well. So, do the trade.
The exact same thing happens with the doctor and his secretary. He's a lot better answering the phone and he can help the patients directly.
Exactly.
But he still has a secretary to do that because he's better off spending his time on what he's good at. For the exact same reason as Omar and Russ.
Yeah.
Actually, a counter argument. I started planting vegetables because vegetables are expensive in Orania. They are not always fresh.
And you can't earn enough money on your other job, it seems like.
So, and it reduces my expenses. So there's an argument for
Okay, but remember also there's a whole bunch of things that you could do. So by you specializing in vegetable planting, you're allowing somebody else to make your cell phone.
How do you apply this directly to Orania? What ideas do you have for that?
Sorry, say again.
How do you apply it directly to Orania? How do you
Just keep on doing what you're doing because this is a natural process of evolution. If somebody tries to fiddle with it or tweak it or force it in a direction, that's usually when things go wrong, or just still work, because these are forces of nature, right? You're not going to stop gravity, and this is a similar thing. You're not going to stop it, you might slow it down. You might counteract it for a while, but ultimately it's going to
the key in this is prices. All these things translate into prices, and those things are then objectively comparable, and you can decide where you're going to spend your time and effort and make the best deal. Prices sort out this, so
It's the government that with them.
You see, it contradicts what I say again, because it's not driven by price entirely. A lot of personal satisfaction comes in. I mean, I've got my own little herb garden.
Well, what I think Charles is saying is that in the example of the vegetables, for example, there's a whole bunch of things that have to go in there. So you're relying on Omar to do the vegetables up in Pretoria, but she has so many costs to get them here because it's so far that you now shift your ratios. The numbers aren't making sense anymore. So it could be that suddenly, Omar's kitchen burned down, and now Koos is the best pancake baker and Russ baker. He's now is the absolute and comparative advantage. Or Omar moves to Orania. And without the ratios really changing, there's some other factors. So the relative ratio changes, and then you have a different dynamic. So it makes sense in this particular case, given the other variables, for you to plant vegetables. It still doesn't make sense to make your own sulfur.
Would I be where you were ahead?
I was just going to say, there used to be a terrible socialist strategy in the 70s and 60s, which fortunately it seems to have died out, called import substitution. And what they would do is they'd force, by coercion, everything to be made in the country. I suppose it's like what Ethiopia was trying to do.
Probably South Africa.
Yeah. At least that's not compulsory.
No, tariffs are. I mean,
Tariffs
there's
are
a book like this on South African tariffs.
Yeah,
so,
but import substitution, as an entrepreneurial strategy though, that can work quite well. So what you do is you look at what the country's importing from elsewhere, and look at where is the actual comparative advantage? Is there one? Or is this something that could actually be made in South Africa economically cheaper than importing it from overseas? So maybe that's something that Orania could do. It could just analyse which things should be made here. I mean, not to make it coercive or anything, just to provide opportunity and knowledge, and which things should be
I think Orania has already automatically and accidentally done that with, for example, pecan nuts
Okay. Yeah.
and sustainable housing and housing. And
So knowing comparative advantage figures can be an entrepreneurial task to do it.
oh, but that's an important point though. You don't have to know the figures. Between Omar and Koos, they didn't know the 30 and the 40 and the 120.
True. True.
Omar just saw Koos is willing to give 2.5 pancakes,
You just need
and
to
she
see
was
the price.
expecting half. You know, it's just the difference.
The information's in the price.
Stephen, I'm guessing though that the comparative advantage, I think you've said it changes over time, it can change.
Absolutely.
But also that you can deliberately do change it if you feel you must. So for example, rather than forcing people to process platinum here to do autocatalysts, which is Rob Davis' idea, because we have no comparative advantage, you could make this advantage by, for example, changing the text.
I'm going to say,
Could you not?
you're confusing absolute advantage and comparative advantage there, because remember, Koos was worse at rusks and pancakes. So Koos really sucked
So
at
how
it,
does
but
it change?
we're still better off by Koos baking pancakes because he's better at it than making rusks. So it's a comparative advantage, not an absolute advantage. So when the minister says we should produce more platinum, or we should do this, or we should do that, or we should promote tourism, they're actually talking nonsense, because what you should be doing is what you do best, even if you relatively suck at it. If you can do 5 things, but the best thing you can do is plant vegetables, then plant vegetables. Even if you're worse than I&J and every other company in this country, you should still do that, because that's the thing you do
So
best.
when you change incentives for an industry to get them to do something or move in a certain direction, what are you doing? Which principle are you playing around? So for example, you know, we maybe aren't labor competitive, but I know in the previous sort of regime we were electricity competitive, but that we know was subsidized.
It's still absolute advantage though, because even if your labor sucks, if labor is your best product, then you should still provide labor.
But just a question there, if it really sucks, are you going to be able to trade it? This is not the huge problem we have in the world at the moment. We are drowned in a flood of people who have no comparative or relative advantage.
That is exactly the point of.
You always have a
this-
comparative advantage.
Not a disadvantage.
Yeah, you've always got a comparative advantage.
Omar
It's
has
not an absolute.
an absolute advantage. She's much better at rusks. She's four
Yes.
times better at rusks than Koos. And she's at least a third better than Koos at pancakes. Omar is just better. Hence the fact that you guys are saying we should tax her and it's my privilege and level the playing field. And I'm saying the comparative advantage
You must
is
use the term opportunity cost, because if you translate those into opportunity cost, then this becomes clear. It's just the cost in relation to the other product
we
is
should
cheaper.
maybe call it relative cost.
Yeah.
But comparative advantage and relative cost are two sides of the same thing, because your relative cost,
Yeah, but opportunity cost.
the opportunity cost.
is the
Presumers
term
fails when you produce nothing. This theory
If the
fails.
best you can do is to produce nothing,
You should do it.
you should still do it.
Hang on a second. That's not funny. You're going to get a division by 0 there, and your theory will fail.
Your line on the graph, sorry, let me just move to this graph here. Hang on a second. The line on the graph is just going to go negative, or sit below the 0 line here. The principle is still the same.
And if you make things worse by your involvement,
Then you should just not do anything.
Well, you see,
Stephen,
Sure.
just to go back to the question or the issue that Ananda raised is how do you achieve opportunity cost? And sometimes this is just sheer luck, and sometimes you resource rich and so on. But a very interesting example is what happened in South Africa with the car industry. There was a point that we were boycotted, and we started having a scheme of import substitution and so on, and everybody said wah 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 wah. But eventually it worked, because currently we've got the competitive advantage in producing left-hand drive cars
For the world
and for the world. which wouldn't came into place had it not been for the import substitution and sanctions that we had previously. So we learned the skills, we developed the processes, and so you can't really plan these things, or you can plan it, and some guys say a country should, for a period, put up certain barriers in order to develop the skills and competencies, and there's some Chinese economists that
Okay, so
actually
now I get the question a bit better. So I'd like to use an analogy. There's a book I read about a year ago called The Happiness Hypothesis. And the book is all about how do you make people happy, how do you get the maximum happiness out of life. And the guy goes through a whole analysis of what makes people happy. So there's a number of factors. Your genetics is very high up on the list. If you're genetically predisposed not to be happy, there's not much you can really do about your genes. You're going to be unhappy. Life experiences. So if you have a whole bunch of good experiences, that'll make you happy. If you have bad experiences, that'll make you sad. That's obvious. If you take pills, so you can manipulate your happiness chemically. There's a bunch of them. One of the big factors that determines human happiness is trauma during your teenage years. Being able to be in your 20s and 30s with a story to tell. Now, the guy says in the book, you don't want to go and induce trauma on your kids in their teenage years. That is what causes the most happiness at the end of your life. Because having some trauma in your teenage years means that you have a very interesting rest of your life. You've always got a story to tell. But you don't want to go and induce that on your kids. Okay, and it's the same thing here. Yes, we can go and create an absolute advantage. Yes, we can go and try and manipulate us into a Moscow Sassel kind of comparative advantage. Do you want to do that to your country? I'm not convinced. Because it's the use of force which is immoral, and it's the use of taxpayers' money which you're never going to know if you get a return on that money. I'd rather leave it to the free market.
Can I answer Kermit's question?
Sorry, Gavin's been waiting for a long time.
So will these comparative and absolute advantages be shifted dramatically if there are quotas put or regulatory quotas put on production, if currencies are debased, so you can't rely on prices to determine a lot of these issues?
If somebody imposes a 50% tax on Oma's rusks, she suddenly
destroyed her comparative advantage.
Her comparative, no, it doesn't get destroyed. Her comparative advantage now shifts to pancakes, and over time, Koos will be the one doing the rusks.
We know about these rusks.
Because the ratio now changes. So even though Oma might still, even after the tax, have the absolute advantage, her comparative advantage might change to pancakes.
Because during the apartheid regime, we had marketing boards for peaches, apricots, kernels, and of course peanuts.
It changes the structure of the economy in a way that you can't really predict. And this is what's really damaging. We could have all been a hell of a lot better off by just sticking to what we do best, rather than trying all these manipulations on an absolute advantage level rather than at a comparative advantage level.
Okay, for Orania is that you have a relative housing shortage. Okay, to my mind, you don't have a housing shortage because the price adjusts for that, so the demand and supply are the same.
Yep.
But given your aim of expanding Orania, then you do have a housing shortage. If you allowed somebody external to buy land in Orania with the sole purpose of building houses on it and selling it at a profit. Now, in the short term, you might be opposed to that because now you're giving land control to somebody else, and you know that he's just going to profiteer and try and make money out of decent Orania residents. Amen. However, the comparative advantage may be that it's better to let him build the houses and you to do something else rather than building the houses, and in the end everybody comes out better off. But I first want to get a reaction to that and see what is your view on that.
Well, we have a policy on labor that would work at that. So if we would follow that example, all the people in Orania would only house pre-canals and nothing else, but we want a diversified kind of economy. We need builders and plumbers and office workers and everything. So
okay, well then let that guy employ local labor
to do it themselves and to develop better construction. And these days the construction is much better than in the beginning, and there had to be some regulations about it.
I think it's
I know
possible.
it's a sinful.
But no. If you use local labor, it's possible in a sense.
But
Because
let
someone
the
from
guy,
outside
let
to
the
build
guy
houses.
profiteer out of it, because he's only getting the profit by which he's adding value, and then you can make the thing he has to employ local labor and skill them up. But it's still one way out of the bottleneck.
Yeah, but he will invest because the salaries are too low. So for him to make a profit, he have to rent it for 10,000 rand. Most people can't afford it. That's why we
No,
have
that's for him to
subsidize
decide whether
now.
he's going to make a profit.
Well, it depends on the
Comparative
society.
advantage over you at building.
Yeah. You see, then you overcome your bottleneck.
Okay, 2 points. Number one, related to what Charles was saying, also mentioning Rob Davies. We're busy playing that out at this moment in time, because Rob Davies is putting up barriers to the import of American poultry. And the Americans say, we don't like you doing that, we will stop importing the cars that you make here more cheaply we can do in America. So we're busy shooting ourselves in the foot right now. The other point is related to let's do nothing, and I think that's actually, you can say partly in jest, but partly in dead earnest. Because with the advance of automation and robotics, there are lots of people alive now or being born who will never work. There will be no need at all for them to work. So what are they going to do with their nothingness? Part of the challenge of the human race is to enable people to find happiness out of not working.
Yeah. Hopefully coming to Libertarian seminars and keeping the government out of stuff. I don't think that work will ever stop. People meddle in each other's affairs. I see that as a never-ending job. But you never know. We might end up with.
Can Skonk explain my dilemma?
Sorry. Okay. Well, again, I haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I mean, I've got a bunch of guys who work for me, and one thing that they taught me unequivocally was not to compare people to an imagined ideal. Because the fact of the matter is, even if I was better at them, at everything that I employed them for, the fact of the matter is, I was busy. I am netto wealthier for just having them around than I would have been without them. They are wealthier for having me around, despite the fact that they might be worse than 1,000 other options that I could have had.
That's just the same argument that Stephen is making. My problem is when you are better at nothing and you end up doing nothing.
Okay, but the thing is, if you're better at nothing, why would you end up doing nothing? Because if other people left you alone, society as a whole would still be better off with you doing your crappy thing on the corner there.
It says nothing, not a crappy thing. Absolutely nothing.
The bottom line is you're going to produce nothing.
Or worse, you make things worse by your involvement.
Yeah, for example,
There are people like this.
Okay, they're called teenagers.
Well, the law of comparative advantage is quite simple. If you're better at nothing, then you should do nothing well.
Give the best of your ability.
But the problem with that is when you do nothing well, you produce nothing, therefore you sell nothing, therefore you have no income. Okay, this is all predicated on the idea that no matter how badly you do it, you can sell a little bit and still be employed and make some income. My problem is there's a limiting point at zero where these people will have no income, and I think this happens because I think there's about 30 million of them outside the borders of Orania.
We had a discussion similar to this over lunch where we were talking about the future and the laborless future. And I think one of the challenges is getting people to understand that it's not a nightmare, it's actually a dream. To be able to do nothing and have everything done for you and have everything automated and mechanized and just being able to read poetry and, I don't know, study philosophy and stuff for fun. And having everything provided for you, that's heaven. What? How is labor necessary? It's genius. Are we going to get there? Probably not soon.
Who in this room is not hopelessly overworked?
The machines will start getting
Who in this room has actually gone that route? Almost nobody.
Right.
We're all addicted to work because you get your validation through work.
I've gone through periods of not working.
There's a big challenge in how do you keep from getting depressed, how do you keep from getting bored, so there's a bunch of social challenges around not needing to work, but it's not economic problems. Somebody told me a long time ago, I said, I can't imagine a world in which socialism would work, and he said, remember that economics is based on the principle of scarcity. As long as you have scarcity, you will need supply and demand and comparative advantage and all of these economic principles. The moment there's abundance where you can push a button and everybody has a Ferrari and a loaf of bread and a helicopter and a 3-story house with no effort whatsoever, all those economic principles fly out the window, and our primary or goal then will no longer be growth and prosperity and expansion and efficiency. It might actually be equality or philosophy or something.
That can never happen, can it? I mean, Ludwig von Mises explains then you'll want your own planet, then your own galaxy, then your own universe.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. We'll probably never get there.
Resources, insatiable wants, they call it.
Yeah, but that's
No kidding.
Extreme of that. So I see no real proper purpose in government. So people often react to that and say, but how will you prevent chaos from breaking out? Now, I get in the car in the morning and I follow the rules of the road, because not because the government says so, but because my insurance company might chase my premiums up. There's an economic incentive right there. Then I get to work and I obey the laws. I wear the proper pants and the tie and I speak nicely to the people because I want my salary at the end of the month. You don't need physical enforced laws. There's enough economic incentives. In the evening I go home and I lie on the couch and I try not to fart because that offends my wife and I'd like to remain married. You should laugh at that. Anyway, there's rules and you follow them from economic incentives, not from force and threat. And there won't be any chaos that breaks out without government intervention, because there's a whole bunch of social layers, cultural interactions, and norms that we adhere to, cultural norms mostly, that keep us in check and in line. So when Orania decides they'll rather pay more for their houses, but have their people locally all employed, that's a legitimate choice. You might think that there's better ways of doing it. If you choose to sacrifice a bit of economic growth in order to keep the culture a particular way, that's a very legitimate sacrifice, just like I choose to sit in front of the TV and watch soap operas rather than reading Plato.
Just to carry on from what Eric said there, and then response, I don't think there's a problem with Orania's policy. I think if I'm reading between the lines here, a room full of libertarians, everyone's looking for some entrepreneurial, profitable potential avenue, and I think that if Orania would be open to foreign investors wanting to solve your problem of building houses, but use local labor, both your local labor's getting work and they're getting paid, but you would have a landowner who would then rent that property to the people who currently require houses. I don't think there's a problem there. I think everyone can win.
There's a resource limitation, not enough Iranian people to provide the work.
Just don't start a nuclear program.
I just wanted to talk about this idea that you have that if you're not working, if everybody doesn't have to work, they're going to get bored and have nothing to do. It's quite a strange idea, because if you think back historically, before we were running like idiots 24 hours a day, through the winter in many places, people couldn't go outside. They were stuck inside and they had to amuse themselves. And there are all kinds of ways in which we can get a lot of pleasure out of life. And I know because I'm a kept woman and I didn't have to work. And you can, as you said, you can paint, you can do any number of creative things. Well, I have to look after the house. But the other thing is that a lot of people get pleasure out of the one that many people get pleasure out of, that libertarians tend not to think about very much, is helping other people. Because even if you don't have work to do, people still suffer in many ways. And many people, once they have free time on their hands, so very wealthy people, for example, start with charity and that kind of thing. So I just think the idea we have nothing to do is peculiar to culture in which if you're not busy every waking moment of the day, you kind of go, what do I do now?
And yet our 40% unemployment, almost everybody in this country, socialist, communist and capitalist, would say is the biggest challenge facing South Africa at this point in time.
Price control.
Well, unemployment.
Yeah, price control.
Doesn't have anything to do.
They didn't choose not to.
It's not
Because
because
also people choose not to employ him at a low rate.
Yeah.
The
Okay,
point that Stephen was making about once everything is supplied and everything is available quickly and easy, it's not an unemployment issue. Everybody's got everything they want. Then what do they do?
Some of the unemployed might actually be in that position. Fair leisure to what?
Okay, sorry, I think Jack still wanted to say something?
Yeah, I'm going to totally turn things if that's all right. Your speech that you started off today with, I thought was, you said you're going to carry it on later about culture, what exactly is it, how do you define it, and I thought I had an answer to it which I was going to give you later. I thought you were going to sort of...
Okay, maybe I didn't put it clearly enough. Is that what you're saying?
No. You
said you were going to close it off somehow, type again.
Okay, so what I tried to explain is that Omar can be representative of Orania or the Free State or South Africa, and Koos of Hollywood or whatever. But remember that these are social interactions. So it's very much defined by cultural circles as well. And that's why I used the example of pilots and bikers and accountants. So people become accountants or rust bakers or brewers or whatever the case may be. That's the best they can do.
And it might also now be a shift. Self-vaccination seems to be a very important concept here. And yes, in terms of this, you actually have to pay for it. Things cost more, and I just want to, while we're in this forum, just check out if one wanted to import labor in order to do something. Why is self-vaccination such an important concept? Because it is a constraint for this community, and to some degree, I believe it's a bit. I can't think of the word now, but yeah, you buy your Toyota built by black guys in Victoria.
Or get Telkom to put in ideas.
So you buy the labor in to get the Toyota, but there's this artificial barrier to use the labor in any other way in terms of the geographical construct of the borders of Orania. So if they can just explain to me why self-vaccination is such an important concept and under which conditions one might be able to loosen that in order to achieve certain economic growth objectives or other objectives.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Maybe if I could react to that, it has to do with the function of place or geography. In terms of not only cultural identity as a vague concept, but of politics, of practical politics. You can't control everything everywhere. You don't want to do it, but you want to control your vicinity, your town and your community, however big it is. And one way not to control, one way to lose control of it, is to be wholly dependent on either far off labor, or more even labor present, if that labor is not part of the community. So it's possible. South Africa taught us you could build quite a nice economy on a lot of labor that's not part of your inner circle, but you're going to pay the price at some stage.
That also comes with the price.
Yeah, that comes with the price, because labor is political leverage.
I just want to add an example to that. When we have a guy working in our garden, if you want to go away for the weekend, you tell him to take the day off, typically. Because you want to give him the garage keys, he's not staying there, there's security issues around that. Is he going to lock up properly? That's one example. And I think it's a micro level of sort of the same concept to some extent. Right?
Could this be similar to that? Okay, go for it.
No, I just would like to add on to it. It's basically to come back to what was earlier said about